It was one of those late afternoons when the air felt heavy, like the week had been dragging its feet. I was standing by the kitchen counter, watching the light fade through the blinds, when I picked up my phone and called Ethan. He answered with a sigh. Not the tired but happy sigh I used to know, but the kind that makes your stomach twist before you even understand why. Sorry, love. Big project tonight. I'll be at the office late. I tried to sound casual when I told him I understood, but after we hung up, I just stood there with the phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. That's when the thought came to me. Maybe I could make the night a little better for him. I opened the drawer where we kept the old takeout menus, fingers brushing over the faded paper like I was flipping through pieces of our past. And there it was. The small Thai place we used to go to when we first started dating. Back then, we'd sit in the corner booth by the window, talking about everything and nothing until the owners politely told us they were closing. His favorite dish was always the same, pad thai, extra lime. I smiled to myself, thinking how much he'd appreciate that tonight. It wasn't just about the food, it was about reminding him, reminding us, of something good we had before life got so busy. So I grabbed my keys and slipped on a light jacket, the evening air already cooling down. On the drive there, I pictured the way his eyes would light up when I walked in with that familiar paper bag in my hands. I imagined the surprise in his voice, the way he'd pull me in for a quick kiss before diving into the food. It felt good, holding on to that little fantasy. I didn't know it yet, but I was holding on to something else too. A version of Ethan that only existed in my memory. The Thai place smelled exactly the same as it did years ago. Warm, rich, and layered with that unmistakable mix of peanuts, chili, and fresh herbs. As I stood at the counter waiting for the order, I found myself smiling at the little details. The faded red lantern in the corner, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan, the handwritten cash-only sign that had been there forever. It felt like stepping into a snapshot of a simpler time. I even remembered the first time Ethan had taken me there, how he'd made a big deal out of ordering the best pad thai in the city, like it was some well-kept secret. Back then, I thought there was nothing he couldn't make special. When the order was ready, the woman behind the counter handed me the warm paper bag, the scent instantly wrapping around me like an embrace. I cradled it in both hands, as if the food itself carried the weight of the moment I was about to create. On the way to the car, I could almost hear the sound of Ethan's laugh in my mind, deep and full, the way it used to be when I surprised him. It was comforting, but in a bittersweet way, like hearing an old song you didn't realize you'd missed until it played again. I didn't question why my chest felt a little heavy. I just told myself it was nostalgia. The drive to his office was smooth, the city wrapped in that early evening glow where headlights start to sparkle, but the sky hasn't yet given up its light. I kept glancing at the bag on the passenger seat, imagining how the smell must be filling the car, mingling with the faint trace of my perfume. I was proud of myself for doing something thoughtful, for making the effort to connect in a week that had felt too rushed and distant. But under that quiet satisfaction, there was a whisper I chose to ignore, the one that asked why, lately, surprises felt one-sided. As I turned onto the street where his office building stood, I felt a little rush of excitement, the kind you get when you're about to do something unexpectedly sweet. The tall glass windows reflected the fading sky, and I imagined him inside, head bent over his desk, too busy to notice me until I walked in. I found a parking spot a few steps from the entrance, smoothed my jacket, and picked up the bag like it was a gift. My heart beat a little faster, not from nerves, but from that quiet joy of doing something purely out of love. The lobby doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the familiar scent of polished floors and faint coffee met me instantly. I walked toward the reception desk, every step echoing in the quiet space. I caught myself smiling, already picturing Ethan's reaction when the secretary called him down. It was going to be one of those little moments that broke up the monotony of the week, the kind of memory you could look back on and say, "Remember when you surprised me at work?" That's what I thought I was walking into. But there was something else in the air, not something I could name, just a subtle shift, like a cold draft sneaking in through a closed window. I didn't notice it fully then, or maybe I didn't want to. All I knew was that in a few seconds, I'd be standing in front of the desk, ready to ask for Ethan, ready to watch the surprise unfold. And yet, somewhere deep down, I think a part of me already knew the night wasn't going to go the way I had planned. The receptionist looked up from her computer with a warm, practiced smile, the kind you give to someone you've seen around but don't really know. "Hi, Maya," she greeted, like it was perfectly normal for me to be standing there on a Wednesday evening with a takeout bag in my hand. I leaned on the counter a little, lowering my voice as if I were letting her in on a sweet secret. "Could you let Ethan know I'm here? I brought him dinner." I could already imagine her calling up to his office, him sounding surprised but happy, telling me to come upstairs. But instead, she tilted her head slightly, her smile flickering in that way people do when they're about to say something unexpected. "Oh, Ethan? He left at his usual time today, around 6. At first, I didn't even register the words. My brain tried to rearrange them into something that made sense. Maybe she meant he stepped out for a quick break, or ran to grab coffee. My lips parted, ready to ask, but no sound came out. I just stood there, the warm bag of food suddenly feeling heavier in my hands. The moment stretched longer than it should have. I managed a polite smile, the kind you wear when you're trying to hide the fact that your heart just dropped into your stomach. "Oh, right. Thanks," I murmured, as if I had known all along. My fingers tightened around the paper handles until they dug into my skin. Inside, something sharp twisted. Not just confusion, but that instinctive jolt of knowing when something isn't right. I nodded to her once more before turning toward the door, each step echoing louder in my mind than in the empty lobby. Outside, the air felt cooler than it had just minutes before, as if the evening had shifted with the weight of what I'd heard. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at the busy street, the cars streaming by under the amber glow of the streetlights. My hands clutched the takeout bag tighter, the steam still seeping through the paper, carrying the scent of the meal I'd chosen so carefully. It should have been comforting. Instead, it made my stomach turn. Ethan had left at his usual time. Around 6. The words replayed in my head like an uninvited echo. I tried to think of reasons. Maybe he forgot to tell me something had changed. Maybe he had to run an errand. Maybe there was some harmless explanation. But even as I told myself that, a colder truth lingered just beneath. Over the years, I had learned the subtle language of lies, the pauses, the sighs, the way a voice could sound heavier when the story wasn't real. Ethan had spoken that language to me earlier today, and now I couldn't unhear it. The pad thai on the seat beside me had gone from a sweet surprise to a silent witness. Sliding into the driver's seat, I set the bag down gently, almost afraid to look at it again. The streetlights cast long shadows across the dashboard as I started the car, but I didn't put it in gear right away. I sat there, listening to the low hum of the engine, my mind already tracing invisible lines between the version of events Ethan had given me and the one I had just learned. They didn't match. And once you notice the mismatch, you can't pretend you don't see it. I finally pulled away from the curb, the city blurring past my windows as my thoughts grew louder than the traffic. Every red light felt longer than the last, giving me too much time to replay his voice in my head. The measured tone, the sigh at the start, the way he had said big project like he'd practiced it. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel, a small, restless rhythm that betrayed the calm face I still wore. If anyone looked in from the outside, they'd think I was just another woman driving home after a long day. They wouldn't see the quiet storm taking shape under the surface. The smell of the food filled the car, warm and rich, clinging to the fabric of the seats. I used to love that smell. Now it felt like a cruel reminder of how far I'd driven to deliver something to a man who hadn't been where he said he'd be. My mind started piecing together the last few weeks, late nights, vague explanations, small moments I had brushed aside as nothing. And here it was, all those little puzzle pieces beginning to fit together, painting a picture I wasn't ready to look at yet. By the time I turned onto my street, the bag on the seat beside me had lost its warmth, and so had I. But instead of letting my anger spill over, I tucked it neatly away, the same way I would later store this moment in my mind. I told myself I wasn't going to confront him yet. No, I wanted to see just how far this story of his could go. Sometimes, silence isn't about avoiding the truth. Sometimes, it's about letting it reveal itself. When I stepped into the house, the quiet felt heavier than usual, like the walls themselves knew something I didn't want to admit yet. I set the bag on the counter without opening it, the paper now damp and soft from the steam that had nowhere else to go. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at it. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I slid it into the trash, listening to the faint thud as it landed at the bottom. It wasn't about the food anymore. It was about the fact that it was never meant to be eaten tonight. I walked to the mirror in the hallway, the one that had seen me rush out for work in the mornings, fix my lipstick before date nights, and occasionally catch my tired eyes on nights like this. Tonight, I studied my reflection like I was meeting a stranger. I softened my features, tilted my head slightly, practiced the kind of warm, welcoming smile that could hide anything. It wasn't easy, forcing my lips into a curve that my heart didn't feel, but it was necessary. If I wanted the truth, I needed to play my part perfectly. The clock ticked away the minutes until I heard the familiar sound of his car in the driveway. I took a slow breath, straightened my blouse, and stepped into the kitchen. When the door opened, Ethan walked in with the casual ease of someone who believes his story is airtight. "Hey, love," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I smiled back, my voice light, almost playful, as I asked about his big project. He had no idea that every word he spoke tonight would be measured, weighed, and remembered. He launched into his explanation without hesitation, like slipping into a well-rehearsed script. Words about deadlines, demanding clients, and last-minute changes spilled out effortlessly. I nodded in all the right places, letting my eyes soften just enough to sell the part of the trusting wife. Inside, I was cataloging every detail, the times he claimed, the names he dropped, the little pauses where he searched for the next believable thread. It's amazing how, when you're really listening, lies start to sound like they're wearing costumes that don't quite fit. As he talked, I found myself studying him in a way I hadn't in years. The slight twitch in his jaw when he glanced away, the way his hands moved more than usual, like they needed something to do. I wondered if he realized that guilt often leaks out in the smallest gestures. If he did, he was either convinced I wouldn't notice, or he didn't care. Either way, I wasn't about to tip him off that I was noticing everything. The more he spoke, the more I realized how calm I felt, not numb, but focused. After dinner, he excused himself to finish up some work in his home office. I watched him disappear down the hallway, my expression as neutral as it had been all evening. But as soon as I was alone, I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the game I'd just agreed to play. I wasn't chasing answers anymore. I was waiting for them to come to me. And from the way he was weaving his stories, I had no doubt they would. I poured myself a glass of wine, letting the deep red swirl slowly in the glass before taking a sip. The warmth spread through me, not enough to blur my thoughts, just enough to keep me steady. From down the hall, I could hear the faint clacking of keys, the occasional shuffle of papers, or maybe that's what he wanted me to believe. I leaned against the counter, the cool surface pressing into my palms, and let my mind replay the evening in slow motion. Every smile I'd given him, every soft laugh, every nod, all deliberate. I was no longer just his wife tonight. I was his audience, his witness, and eventually, his judge. I thought about the cold pad thai in the trash and how, in a way, it had been the first casualty in what was quietly becoming a war. I didn't feel like a victim, though. Not yet. There was a strange clarity in knowing I had time on my side. The truth has a way of surfacing, especially when someone keeps talking, convinced you're not listening closely enough. And I intended to let him keep talking, spinning his web, until he wrapped himself in it. By the time I finished my wine, I had my next move planned. Not a confrontation, not yet, but a way to keep him comfortable enough to lie again. I rinsed the glass, placed it in the sink, and took one last look toward the hallway where his office door was closed. I smiled to myself, not the practiced one I'd worn earlier, but something sharper, quieter. If this was going to be a game, I was ready to play it better than he ever imagined. Over the next few days, I became someone else entirely. A softer, lighter version of myself, the kind of wife who seemed blissfully unaware. At breakfast, I'd ask him how the late project was coming along, my voice warm, my eyes curious in just the right way. He'd lean back in his chair, sip his coffee, and dive into more details. Late meetings, exhausted teammates, urgent client calls. Each explanation came dressed in perfect logic, but I could see the seams fraying. And I kept tugging, gently, with every innocent-sounding question. I started carrying my phone everywhere, using it less for calls and more for quiet recordings. A casual conversation in the kitchen while he buttered his toast. A quick chat in the living room before he headed to the office. I'd smile, nod, and let the recorder capture every word, every timestamp, every contradiction. It was strange, almost surreal, how natural it became to live in two realities at once. The one where I played the loving wife, and the one where I was building a case against the man sitting across from me. At night, while he was supposedly working late again, I would sit at my desk with my laptop, digging deeper. I tracked his credit card charges, mapping them against the times he claimed to be in the office. I checked his location history, scrolling through pins that landed nowhere near his work. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. Dinners at unfamiliar restaurants, a boutique hotel booked for 2 hours, flowers purchased but never brought home. Every discovery made me more certain. Ethan wasn't just lying to me. He was living somewhere else entirely when the sun went down. I remember the first time I saw her name. It was buried in a receipt from a small wine bar, a place Ethan had never mentioned, tucked into the email confirmation for a reservation he'd carelessly forwarded to his personal account. For 2, it read, followed by a note in the comments section. Window table, please. For Anna. My stomach tightened, but my hands stayed steady on the mouse. There she was, not a ghost or a suspicion anymore, but a person with a name, sitting across from him where I should have been. From that moment, my questions to him became even more calculated. Long night? I'd ask when he came home smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't wear. Must be exhausting, I'd say when he complained about how demanding his client was. Each time I let him talk, spinning his story further, adding details he thought made it believable. But the more he talked, the more he tripped over his own words. I didn't interrupt. I didn't accuse. I just kept storing every slip, every inconsistency, like a jeweler collecting stones before setting them into the perfect piece. By the 3rd night, I had enough proof to fill a folder on my computer. And I did. I labeled it Anniversary Plans and tucked it neatly away, knowing one day soon I'd open it right in front of him. But I wasn't rushing. No, I wanted him to feel safe, to think his lies were holding. The deeper he sank into his false security, the more satisfying it would be when the ground finally gave way beneath him. My investigation became a quiet routine, woven seamlessly into the fabric of my days. A casual lunch with a friend would end with me driving by the hotel I'd seen on his statements. A quick errand across town became an opportunity to spot his car parked outside a restaurant he'd never mentioned. Sometimes I'd see him there, not close enough to be noticed, but just near enough to confirm everything I already knew. His laugh, his body language, the way he leaned in toward her like she was the center of his universe. It was almost cinematic, if you ignored the fact that I was supposed to be playing that role. Every night I'd return home before he did, making sure the house felt exactly the same as when he left. The lights just dim enough, dinner remnants in the sink, a casual TV show playing in the background. I wanted him to step back into the life he thought was untouched by suspicion. And when he'd walk through the door with that satisfied air, I'd greet him like nothing was out of place, letting him believe I was still in the dark. It was my way of handing him more rope, watching as he tied the knot himself. The truth was, I'd already decided how this would end. Not with shouting, not with tears. Those would give him too much power. No, I wanted precision. A reveal so sharp it would slice through every excuse before he could even form the words. I pictured it often now, the moment his face would shift, the moment his story would collapse. And with each day that passed, I was only perfecting the setup. Our anniversary arrived on a Thursday, wrapped in the kind of crisp autumn air that used to make me crave warm dinners and long talks. Ethan thought we'd be going out, as we always did, but I told him I wanted something quieter this year. Just us, at home. I have something special planned, I'd said, letting my smile linger just long enough for him to believe it meant romance. In truth, I had every detail timed, every piece of the night arranged, so it would unfold exactly the way I wanted. I set the table with our best plates, the ones we rarely used, and lit 2 slender candles in the center. The pad thai sat in its serving dish, steam curling upward, carrying the same scent from that night weeks ago. It was almost poetic. The dinner he'd never eaten, revived just for him. My phone rested face down beside my glass, but I knew what waited inside, a carefully stitched compilation of his own voice telling lie after lie, spliced together with photos and receipts that told the real story. It was my version of a love letter, except mine wasn't meant to be kept. When he walked in, his face softened with that easy smile he reserved for when he thought life was perfectly in his favor. "Wow," he said, looking at the table. "You really went all out." I motioned for him to sit, my voice warm but steady. I wanted tonight to be honest. He didn't catch the edge in my tone. Not yet. But he would. Very soon. And when he did, there would be no way back to the life he thought he still had. We ate in near silence at first, the soft clink of forks against plates filling the space between us. I watched him take a bite of the pad thai, chew thoughtfully, and smile. "Still my favorite," he said, his voice warm, almost nostalgic. I nodded, swirling the wine in my glass, letting the moment stretch until it felt almost comfortable. That's when I reached for my phone. Without a word, I tapped the screen, and the first recording began to play. His voice, clear and familiar, recounting one of his late nights at the office. At first, he froze mid-bite, his eyes darting from the phone to me. The recording continued, rolling into another version of the same lie, told on a different day, followed by the soft click of my keyboard as I pulled up photos. Him at the wine bar, at the boutique hotel, his hand resting on the small of a woman's back. The name Anna flashed across one of the receipts, in bold letters, impossible to ignore. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The proof filled the air between us like smoke, thick and undeniable. His mouth opened, maybe to explain, maybe to plead, but I held up my hand, palm out, stopping him before the first syllable could escape. My voice was calm, steady, but edged with steel. "Since you like double lives so much, I thought I'd give you a double surprise. Dinner and divorce papers." I slid the manila envelope across the table, the weight of it landing with a finality that matched the look on his face. His fingers hovered over it, but he didn't touch it. I could see the moment he realized this wasn't a fight he could talk his way out of. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hiss of the candles. His gaze dropped to the untouched food in front of him, the steam now fading into the cool air. I stood, my chair sliding back slowly, deliberately. There was no rush. The moment was already mine. "Enjoy your dinner," I said softly, my tone not unkind, but stripped of anything resembling love. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, slipping it on with the same care I'd taken in planning this night. He still hadn't moved when I reached the doorway. I paused, turning just enough to see him clearly. His hands were resting on either side of the plate, knuckles pale, his eyes fixed on the table as if looking anywhere else might make it all worse. And maybe it would. There was no anger left in me, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing I hadn't just caught him. I'd outplayed him. The dinner he thought was a celebration had become the final chapter of a story he'd been writing, without realizing I'd been reading it all along. I stepped outside into the crisp night air, the cool breeze washing over me like a reset. Behind me, the house stood still, holding the remnants of the life we'd shared. I walked down the path without looking back, the sound of my heels tapping against the pavement steady and sure. Somewhere inside, the food was growing cold again. This time, forever. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt light.